Prime Minister Anthony Albanese launches a COVID-19 inquiry that will define how the nation and businesses deal with future pandemics and crises. Former Treasurer Josh Frydenberg has a big new role that will impact any political aspirations. And your Pizza Hut order might have just been hacked. Welcome to Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. It is Friday, the 22nd of September, 2023. I'm Michael Thompson and Sean Aylmer is away. I'm joined instead by Jennifer Duke. Jen, good morning.
Good morning, Michael.
Now, after the show, Jen, you have a fairly wide-ranging conversation with Mike Sales, who is the CEO of Nuveen Real Assets.
Yeah, we had a really interesting chat, and I don't think people tend to appreciate how wide-ranging that real estate assets actually are. So we were covering farmland all the way to the work-from-home trend and changing office habits, and he has this really interesting global perspective on what real estate's doing right now.
Yeah, and Nuveen is a global giant in this space. And Mike is visiting Australia for a short period of time, so it was a perfect opportunity to get a global perspective on all of that. It is well worth a listen, especially if you are an investor. Stick around for that one. The main story this morning, though, Jen, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has launched a COVID-19 inquiry, and it is going to really set us up for the future in terms of how prepared we are and how we deal with events like pandemics and other crises. He did stop short, though, of announcing a royal commission.
That's right. And he also left actions taken unilaterally by state and territory governments off the table for this inquiry. What will be included, though, is governance. So that includes the actual responsibilities and roles of the different levels of government and the advisory bodies. And the health response measures and support will naturally be a substantial focus of this. Shadow Health Minister Anne Ruston said it was concerning that there is an inquiry into COVID rather than a royal commission, and that would automatically have had the powers to compel the types of witnesses that she thinks it needs. That includes those state and territory premiers. Now, there will be an independent panel overlooking the inquiry, and that includes public servants and health experts. It will also feature health economist Angela Jackson from Impact Economics and Policy, and we'll be hearing back from the inquiry within the year.
Now, health is quite rightly a huge part of this, but in your day job, you are the economics correspondent for Capital Brief, so you would be focused on the financial aspect right now. How have businesses responded to this?
So firstly, this inquiry will dig into the support available for industry and businesses in crises, plus the financial support for individuals. And it is likely to get right to the heart of those supply chain problems and transport issues, the labour shortages, and how to help specific industries in future who are hurt the most by the impacts of pandemics and lockdowns. So Employer Association AI Group welcomed the inquiry as an opportunity to understand what went wrong and what went well. But the group was critical of the lack of state and territory scrutiny in the terms of reference, saying they wanted the nation to actually come to grips with those consequences of locking down buildings, suburbs, entire states in some cases. Clearly, they're talking about Victoria. And they want health and the economy to have an equal footing in this inquiry.
This is really important, isn't it, Jen? Because the thing is, during COVID, during the pandemic, it was all happening so quickly and it was all so unprecedented that there was no blueprint for how to deal with this. And there was an element of policy just being made on the run. So in any kind of circumstance, anytime something happens within a business, you should really be having that debrief and the review of what worked, what didn't work, what do we need to do in the future so that you can actually develop that blueprint for next time.
It's definitely a healthy thing to do. And I think it's interesting also to look at things that happened very quickly with that benefit of hindsight. Now, it is interesting the things that are being excluded from the inquiry and that it isn't a royal commission. So whether or not we'll get the full benefit of what we should be doing is debatable. But I think the businesses will be quite heartened for future pandemics, I suppose, that we know are kind of more of an inevitability, that we will actually have a bit of guidance next time about what might happen, what government should do, what they shouldn't do, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big story and an important one. How did local markets perform yesterday?
So the S&P ASX 200 closed down 1.4% to 7,065 points. And it was a pretty brutal trading day, actually, that ended at lows that we've not seen since early July. The sectors that were hardest hit were financials and energy. Commonwealth Bank, NAB, ANZ and Westpac were actually all down more than 1.5%. The worst performer of the majors was Sayona Mining, down 11.4%. Link Administration was up 3%. Transurban fell 3.7% after being knocked back by the competition regulator from buying Melbourne's Eastlink toll road.
Now, international markets, Jen, the big story overnight, of course, is the announcement that Rupert Murdoch will be stepping down as chairman of News Corp and Fox Entertainment. The 92-year-old says that he is in robust health, but that the time is right for a change. He'll be succeeded by his son Lachlan Murdoch, who will officially take over in November. That is a change that's been kind of widely expected for some time. Shares in both companies rose following the announcement. This is a big story, and I'm sure we'll hear plenty about it in coming days as people analyse Rupert Murdoch's legacy and also look at what Lachlan Murdoch might do now that he is in charge. As I said, big story, but there's a fair bit happening elsewhere in international markets as well.
That's right. The US Federal Reserve left its benchmark interest rate on hold. Everyone was waiting on this one. But it has suggested that there's one more rate rise yet to go, and they'll be higher for longer until there is confidence that inflation is definitely coming down. Also in the US, those car industry strikes have deepened. Mercedes-Benz has been added to the list of top brands that have been disrupted. About 200 union workers in Alabama at one of their major supplier plants have walked off the job. And former People's Bank of China Governor Yi Gang wants the central bank to do more to help the Chinese economy. So he's suggested appropriately increasing macroeconomic policies to help bolster domestic demand, as well as doing more to help the struggling housing sector. And he said that the rest of the world took about a year to recover from COVID lockdowns, but China has only had 6 months of that process so far.
All right, there's a bit we still need to cover. Jen, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Jen, the federal budget was obviously handed down in May. So what's that, about 5.5, 6 months ago now? And the federal government is releasing its final budget outcome this morning, which sounds very final, very official. But an early look at the figures show a surplus of $22.1 billion in 2022-23. That's much higher than the $77.9 billion deficit previously forecast, of course, driven by the strong labour market and commodities prices.
So this is actually the first surplus since Peter Costello's 2007-2008 budget, and it's the first Labor surplus since Keating in 1989. The $100 billion improvement is the biggest nominal jump on record as well. Now, the government's paid down 95% of the increase in tax revisions back into the budget, and that's lowered gross debt by $87.2 billion. This is ultimately a move to reduce interest payments, with government forecasts showing this will save the nation $12 billion in interest for the 5 years to 2026.
So the final budget outcome is essentially just wrapping up all of the projections and all of the figures, et cetera, that were handed down on that night back in May.
That's right. So it's sort of going, we put all these forecasts out, we know what we thought was going to happen, but obviously people work different hours, they pay different income tax than any model can ever accurately predict. And so this is what actually occurred over that year.
Okay. Now, industrial action, Jen, at 3 LNG sites in Western Australia is continuing, and it is ushering in the first big test of new industrial relations rules. Mediated discussions between Chevron and the unions have broken down, meaning they'll head to the Fair Work Commission today.
So Chevron wants the Commission to declare it intractable bargaining, and this would mean an arbitrated decision is made to resolve the dispute and end the industrial action. And it's going to be a major test of the rules, as you mentioned, because it's the first time that the Albanese government's intractable bargaining laws will have been used. And it may take weeks to come to an arrangement. So this has been a major union action, and it's threatened about 7% of global LNG supply and much of Western Australia's domestic supply, causing this huge volatility in gas prices, particularly in Europe. And the Offshore Alliance has been seeking better terms for workers, while Chevron says it's offering a very similar deal to their competitors. And it's told the Commission that meeting the union's demand will actually see its labour costs rise by almost 50%.
Now, Jen, how about this one? Stake is suing Stake. And if you are at all confused, well, Stake thinks that you probably should be, because the share trading platform Stake, who has been a supporter of Fear and Greed in the past, is taking online crypto casino Stake.com to court over their similar names. Now, they are spelt the same, S-T-A-K-E. One is just Stake and one is Stake.com. So it is a little bit confusing.
It is confusing. So it's this huge war of these two rival services and cities, actually. So it's crypto casino Stake.com, which is based in Melbourne, and it currently doesn't serve Australians because of our domestic gambling rules. And the other Stake is a trading platform that's based in Sydney, and it's the third biggest broker in the country. Now, this Stake the second stake, has the URL stake.com.au, and it's gone to the federal court alleging that stake.com is breaching consumer laws and misleading people by using the Stake brand in its marketing, sports sponsorships, and apparel. And it reckons that people might mistakenly think the two platforms are related. Now, stake.com says the claim is frivolous, they're proud of their global brand, and they abide by laws in the countries they operate within. And they don't offer services to Aussies.
Can you imagine hearing this matter in court? Goodness me, that would be confusing. And the court stenographer trying to type this out, going stake. Now, which stake was that? Goodness me, that is a very, very interesting case.
It is interesting. It'll be funny to see how it gets reported in headlines. I feel like you'd have to be a very careful copy editor.
Oh, yeah, but there's all sorts of potential for great stake puns. Like there's a lot at stake here, obviously. Those kind of the obvious ones.
Oh, no, it's dreadful. Staking me in the heart.
Excellent. Well done. We have certainly had an impact on you during the time that you have been with Fear and Greed, and this is good to see. Now, the Australian Council of Trade Unions price gouging inquiry has kicked off in Canberra. Former competition watchdog chair Alan Fells is leading the public hearings.
So Fells says that some price rises are absolutely connected to rising costs on businesses, but not all of them. And he's digging into what is driving those price rises that we're seeing at the moment, but particularly for essentials and the increasing margins that some big businesses are saying they're getting. So he's eager to find out where within supply chains any price gouging might be happening. Now, he's put supermarkets, energy retailers and airlines on watch as among the specific businesses that he wants to inspect in more detail. And we are expecting an interim report due at the end of the year. And Fells says that he will actually name and shame businesses that he finds to be price gouging. That's provided there's enough evidence. And if there are doubts, he's going to hand it over to the government for further scrutiny.
Now, Jen, the new chairman of Goldman Sachs Australia and New Zealand is a somewhat familiar name. It's former treasurer Josh Frydenberg.
Frydenberg. So he actually obviously lost his seat at the last election to Teal Minig Ryan and then quickly turned to a career in banking. Now, he's hugely respected in Canberra, but this really closes the door on speculation that he might make a near-term return to politics. And that will disappoint a lot of people in the coalition because it really is a more significant commitment at the bank compared to his previous role with Goldman as a senior regional advisor for the Asia-Pacific region. And it signals his longer-term plans. So according to a statement, Frydenberg will be focusing on strengthening and deepening client coverage across Australia and New Zealand, and he's going to continue providing that economic and geopolitical advice for the Asia-Pacific region.
Jen, the world might soon find out about your late-night junk food preferences.
Uh-oh.
I haven't got that much to hide, but I would still be curious to see what others are up to. Pizza Hut is the latest business to have been hacked. About 200,000 customers have had their data compromised via an unauthorized third party accessing the data.
So the breach included some customer names, delivery addresses, emails, and contact numbers, but they also got the details of specific customer orders. So these hackers now know who likes pepperoni, how many people are choosing barbecue sauce over tomato, and it also means that they'll have that ultimate private and controversial information of who's choosing pineapple on their pizza. But there is, of course, quite a serious side to this. We are seeing a huge number of breaches and cyber attacks, and this is a criminal activity. So it's something that I think all businesses are pretty concerned about at the moment.
Yeah, I think so. And this is just, as you say, another high-profile incident. And we talked about this earlier in the week, that the pressure is on boards and executives to ensure that they are taking this risk very, very seriously because the penalties are quite extreme.
That's true. But also, do you have pineapple on your pizza?
Personally?
Yes.
Occasionally, if it warrants, if it's a Hawaiian pizza.
You get a pass then. That's fine.
Thank you. I feel like you're putting me under some pressure here today. Now, how about this one, Jen? Battery manufacturing operations are being launched in Detroit by none other than Aussie billionaire Andrew Forrest.
So Fortescue Metals Group is looking to build electric vehicle battery systems and components at a 400,000 square foot Detroit facility. Now, the iron ore giant is looking to diversify into the green energy space. And this is a huge step that will actually help supply its electric ore mining truck fleet. CEO Mark Hutchinson said that federal tax credits and incentives from the US state of Michigan are helping support the costs for the project. which weren't disclosed, unfortunately, because we'd all like to know. Now, Fortescue is, of course, a major greenhouse gas emitter due to its function as an iron ore producer, but it's intending to stop buying carbon offsets and is on a path to decarbonise. And earlier this week, it actually launched an advertising campaign that said it's time to break up fossil fuels and warned of the harmful effects on human life of warming impacts like humidity.
Yeah, on a related theme, I suppose, Jen, super funds are not yet tooled up to meet disclosure standards for climate-related financial risks, despite obligations to make disclosures expected to be introduced next year.
So engineering consulting firm Oricon has made a submission to Treasury about the $3.5 trillion superannuation sector and these upcoming sustainability standards. And on its analysis, Aware Super and UniSuper are the only ones really on track improving their climate disclosures at all. All of the funds, though, are falling below international sustainability standards, which are expected to give investors more clarity and the ability to compare opportunities on a global basis. This will also provide transparency on how businesses are reaching net zero targets. And when these standards are made mandatory, there's going to need to be a dramatic improvement, with some funds making none of these disclosures at the moment.
All right, turning to international news now. And Jen, we don't cover a lot of Icelandic news on this podcast, but that changes now, because if you do choose to visit the Nordic country to see its hot springs and its waterfalls and its flows on lava and the volcanoes and all that, you're going to have to pay a new levy.
So they're slugging visitors with a tourist tax, and that's to ease the impact of one of their biggest industries on the environment. So Iceland's Prime Minister is actually concerned about an exponential growth of tourism in the last decade having effects on their climate, but also on their lovely unspoiled environment, like you mentioned. So they're looking to raise taxes on those who travel to Iceland for visits through a new levy. They're saying it won't be a high amount to start with, but it's a step to help the tourism sector become circular and to accelerate environmental protection. And it's a pretty bold step given tourism drives 6% of Iceland's GDP.
Tensions are continuing to rise between India and Canada. So Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau accused the emerging economies government of assisting with the killing of a Sikh separatist leader in the nation recently, which India denies. And the relationship between the two nations has now spilled over into travel warnings.
So India is now telling its citizens to exercise the utmost caution in Canada, suggesting that their safety is at risk and they should remain vigilant. There's a large number of Indian nationals studying in Canada. It's the top source of both international students and immigrants in the country. And they're also a major contributor to local tourism and contribute $1 in every $4 of non-resident spending in Canada. So any restriction or pullback due to fears from Indians about visiting could result in a significant economic hit. Canada is saying that it is one of the safest countries in the world, though.
Now, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has delayed deadlines to phase out petrol cars over concerns it will create uncertainty and deter investment.
So Sunak's moved the deadline to end the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles to 2035, and that's later than the 2030 he previously promised. He's also going to push back a deadline to get homeowners and landlords to switch their properties to heating that uses renewable energy. But he has reaffirmed plans to reach net zero by 2050, which is currently enshrined in British law, so that's good, I suppose. Now, Sunak says that he has done this for several reasons, including to keep the public on side through the transition and to avoid a backlash that undermines the ultimate 2050 goal. But part of the issue right now is the intense cost of living crisis facing families in the UK, and economists and climate activists alike are concerned, saying it's diluting the promises the government made, and it might see countries in Europe taking a similar approach.
All right, now, how about a nice positive story for us to finish on today? Singapore has shrunk its financial services industry gender pay gap by half in just a decade. That is pretty quick.
It's a really, really big turnaround, and the data comes through the Ministry of Manpower, actually its name, which reports that the pay gap has narrowed to 15.6% in 2022. Now compare that to 27.1% about a decade ago. And this gap is probably going to continue to decline. So the ministry is attributing a large portion of the remaining gap to more men in senior positions that are typically better paid. And it also noted that hours worked, experience and education are having a bit of an effect. So Singapore is yet to bring in its first ever workplace fairness laws. That's coming into effect next year, but it has already improved parental leave and flexible work arrangements to attract parents back into work as its population ages, and that's usually mums. And Singapore's top 100 listed companies have also seen a shift over the past few years, so women now actually make up 22.7% of boards, and that's up from less than 16% in 2018. Clearly a long way to go, but really good signs of improvement.
Yeah, it is. All right, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview. You're speaking today with Mike Sales, the CEO of Nuveen Real Assets.
Yeah, and we actually got really into talking about ESG and how much of a challenge that is for the real estate sector, which is clearly a theme in today's show and lots of them. There's some real friction, though, in that real estate space about the transition that investors should probably know about.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, Nuveen is a global giant in this space, so it is well worth a listen. It's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And a quick shout out as well to the new episode of How Do They Afford That, which is our sister podcast all about making your money work harder for you. This week's episode is your superannuation health check. Basically, everything that you might have ever wanted to know about your superannuation, just may not have ever asked. We go through it all. You'll find it wherever you listen to podcasts, and we'll put a link in today's show notes as well. Thank you, Jen.
Thanks so much, Michael.
It is Friday, the 22nd of September, 2023. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed Business News. Have a great day.